Hey, good afternoon to people on the East Coast, and good morning to everyone else in the US. We're going to kick off here with our webinar for building a successful automation roadmap for food production. My name is Alex Kepsel, and I'm the product marketing manager at Formic. If you're not familiar with Formic, we're a robots as a service automation provider for a lot of companies in the food space, food and beverage, and CPG space. So we're bringing lots of knowledge and wisdom and lessons learned from working with manufacturers like yourselves, and from Daniel, who I'm going to introduce here in a second as our guest speaker and presenter, who brings a wealth of knowledge from his past career and current role at Formic. So just some context for this webinar. We're going to go through a lot of content here, but you'll be able to access these slides at the end. You'll get an email at the end of the webinar to access these again. So don't take screenshots. We'll have this available for you. You also have the chance to ask questions. So as we go, please drop your questions in the question box and we'll answer those at the end. Last thing, and then I'll introduce Daniel and we'll get going here. Context for this, obviously building a successful automation roadmap for food production. Hard to nail that in 30 minutes, but I guarantee you, you all will walk away with a lot of knowledge and best practices that you can take with you literally today and start building your own automation roadmap. So we're really excited for it. So with that, don't want to waste any more time. I'm going to introduce Daniel here and hand it over to him. So Danijel Lolic is our head of product and solutions at Formic, where he's responsible for our product roadmap and strategy and working with customers to simplify how they bring in automation into their operation. He has a technical engineering background, and prior to Formic, he spent almost more than a decade in engineering and operations, and worked his way up to VP of operations at Rice Fruit Company, which I'll tell you about in a second. And now we're excited to have Daniel on board with us and leading our product and solution roadmap. So with that, I'll hand it over to Daniel, and the floor is yours.
Thanks, Alex, and thanks everyone for having me here today. I'm a little nervous, but very excited overall to be here. And I'll talk just briefly about my background and what we're hoping to talk here about today. So as Alex mentioned, I have a background in food handling, food production. So I was at Rice Fruit Company for a little over 10 years. I was in engineering there to begin with. I ended up as the vice president of operations for most of the back half of my career there, and I oversaw all of our technical teams and a lot of our production operation teams. So I have a lot of experience in overseeing food handling. We were the East Coast's largest apple packer and distribution site. Worked with everyone from very small mom and pop operations all the way up to the Walmarts, Kroger's, Costco's of the world. And I'm very fortunate now to be at Formic, overseeing the other side of it, where we're actually supplying solutions to those types of customers, to food handling operations, among others. And I'm very fortunate I get to kind of continue to apply my operational background, because at the end of the day, we continue to work with these customers on a day in, day out after the system is deployed. So we get to leverage our operational expertise and our automation expertise to ensure that our customers continue to build on the success they have with the initial investment. So I'm excited to talk to you about the concept of the automation roadmap today, and specifically as it pertains to food handling operations, whether it's producers, manufacturers, packers, repackers, distribution operations in general. So I'll point us to Alex worked very hard with a number of producers and manufacturers in the United States over the last extensive period of time to prepare a 2024 survey of producers and manufacturers on what their goals and challenges are in their businesses and in their industries. And I'd like to open with that here today, because I think that a lot of the goals and challenges shared by, this is not food specific, of course, but I think a lot of it applies to a lot of food operations as well. And what you'll notice here is that a lot of the goals and challenges, I think, probably apply to your businesses as well, from increasing production capacity, improving ergonomics and worker safety, increasing quality, reducing reliance on manual labor, lowering costs, and potentially some combination or even a combination of all of the above. And among the top goals identified were increasing production, finding new customers, opening new doors, and improving product and process quality. And the challenges integral to those initiatives are the rising cost of material, the rising cost of labor, and labor shortages, or just in general, a lack of availability of labor. And in particular for food handling operations, we're going to add another layer of complexity. And certainly from my previous career and today's career, working with food handlers at Formic as well, and I think relevant to all of you on this webinar today, is food safety in particular is a very core component of any of the initiatives within your businesses. And I think they certainly apply to, well, presumably if you're a food handler here today, they certainly apply to you from all the way from Food Safety Modernization Act to various food safety schemes, GFSI, SQF. Don't need to run through all of them. I come from an SQF background. We were an SQF level 3 facility. A lot of our customers today are SQF operations as well, but certainly the range varies. And then, of course, you can add a whole host of differences on that, whether you are handling organics or allergens, GMO, non-GMO, et cetera. So integral to all of these components is hygienic design and sanitation requirements. And that's broadly true for all of our customers. It's not necessarily from the food safety perspective, but everyone has a commitment and a requirement for hygienic design and sanitation requirements. And the second component of this as well is food quality. As we talk about automation, as we talk about workflows in food handling facilities in general, the quality of the product itself, and in my background, that was handling fresh produce. It was apples. Certainly the way you handle an apple has a pretty significant impact on the quality of the product itself. And that's very true, I think, for a lot of our food operations that work with Formic and that are looking to automate today. There's the quality of the process involved in how you're handling food. There's the quality of the packaging, the handling, I think the quality of the work and the experience for your labor force as well. So I'll issue a couple of disclaimers, so to speak, right? So I think that there's certainly a wide range of food handling operations, some of whom are what would be considered processors, others are not processors, or you can have down from a very manual repack operation where you're receiving product into your dock, taking it from one package into another package, or maybe just assessing it for quality before you put it back into the same package. Some of those types of operations tend not to necessarily have a lot of processing or packing automation. There are, however, a very broad range, I think, of attendees here today, and certainly of food handling operations in the US that span the range from very, very advanced processing capabilities to not necessarily needing that level of complexity in their operations. So we will be speaking to elements that I think pertain to both. Certainly, we will talk a little bit about some of the processing side, but we'll try to focus a little bit more on the end-of-line components that I think would be relevant to most everyone here today. And when we use the term automation, it's quite broad. I think, for a lot of people, you use the word automation, and you start thinking robots everywhere, automated storage and retrieval systems, and some of that certainly is true. But automation can really be quite a broad range of equipment. It can be quite a broad range of initiatives. And as we go through today, I think we'll focus a little bit on what some might not consider automation, but certainly it does help improve the process or the workflow and might be considered more of a semi-automated activity, but can still yield very positive results. And finally, in the way that I present here today, it might not be the order that you're prioritizing. It might not be the order in which you will be automating, but it's a logical process flow. And then as we get to the end, we can talk about alternative paths and processes that you can follow. So the automation journey for different types of businesses can vary, of course, right? If, as mentioned earlier, if you're a large-scale processing operation, what you're looking to do today and what you need to do in your operation today is going to vary for you relative to what someone who's just starting out and what might be their automation roadmap or their automation journey. We have some very small batch operations in the US and globally that handle admittedly very few units per month, but are looking to grow their business, or they have a very demanding customer base. And for many of them, it's a very manual operation. As you follow the range down through, what you'll note is as you continue to go into more intensive and certainly higher batch operations or more intensive processing operations, they tend to be more automated as we go through that workflow. As we talk about the broader production flow, and again, this is going to span the line of front of line to end of line, and even some other activities. And if it's not necessarily true that all of this applies to everyone here today, certainly I think everything here would apply to a very large scale processing operation. Some subsets of it will apply to everyone here today. So I'm not going to read through all of these things. I think everyone here can do that, but we're going to start at the receiving end, and we're going to breeze through fairly quickly through the front of line equipment and automation activities. Not to say that those aren't critical, and certainly I would invite anyone here who's particularly interested in any one of those things to follow up with us. And I'll be very upfront with you all. I'm not an expert in all of these tools and technologies. Certainly I know very little about baking, for example, but I'm familiar with the process flows. I'm familiar with the decision-making activities. So as I mentioned, we'll start with the front of line. We've highlighted that here today. We'll talk through a few of those items and we'll breeze through them fairly promptly, but for context, just wanted to open with where we are on the production flow line. So as we talk about the infeed and pretreatment of a production or packing line or processing line, typically it's one of the first investments an operation makes is in the infeed, their ability to receive product and introduce it to their handling line. It's generally customized for your product and operation. Certainly if you are handling fresh produce like I was, there's some fairly common equipment that you'll see at a lot of certainly different apple handling facilities or tree fruit handling facilities. I think the same is true of when you go into bakeries or nut handling facilities. You see fairly common infeed and pretreatment equipment by industry type or by product type. The upfront cost for this type of equipment can be quite variable based on the use case, but they tend to be essential kind of price to play requirements for processors, right? You may do an ROI calculation that seems a little senseless on an infeed hopper potentially, but you don't have much of a choice. You want to be able, and you have to be able to receive product to your packing line. They generally have low operational complexity relative to alternative options. They have fairly low service complexity. They tend to be more mechanical, certainly some electromechanical, but more mechanical. And there's a fairly moderate ROI on these. Hand in hand with that is your processing equipment, right? You receive the product and you mix it, you might bake it, you might cook it, you might separate it somehow, wash it, stage it. All manner of infeed and pretreatment and processing equipment goes together, and everything just said about the infeed equipment is largely true here as well, with the caveat that this type of equipment tends to be a little bit more expensive, a little bit more complex on the servicing and operational complexity, and a little bit more moderate on its ROI. We then transition into what I'm going to broadly call primary packing preparation. The terminology that you might use to describe some of these things might differ from the terminology I'm using today. I'm trying to cut a fairly broad swath of what this might be. Certainly, again, if you're a processor, this might be somewhat different than if you are not processing, or than if you're just preparing for packing versus processing. So some of this type of equipment might include weighers or volumetric dispensers, sorting and separation systems that can be vision-based. Don't have to be, of course. It can include dosing or dispensing systems. But there's a range of styles and types and systems that can go in here. And there's a fairly variable range of costs, operational complexities, and service complexities. And what tends to be true for a lot of this type of equipment, certainly if you're talking about in the weighing and volumetric dispensing side, that equipment's fairly commoditized, right? So it's fairly moderate on the upfront costs. It's intended to be run day in, day out on one to multi-shift operations, has fairly low service and operational complexity, has very high ROI generally. On the larger scale systems that are sorting and separation systems that are preparing that product for packing or final handling or end of line handling, those types of systems tend to have fairly high upfront costs, high operational complexity. You need very skilled, trained, experienced operators, high service complexity. In my background, we did a fair bit with hyperspectral imaging, with infrared and near infrared vision cameras for separation of fresh produce. That's equipment that takes a fair bit of training for an operator to run and operates and benefit from, and also not something that I was equipped to readily service on day one of owning it. So, but that type of equipment, that style of technology, has a very long-term or a very strong long-term ROI. But it is challenging in the short term. Certainly the adoption and the operational kind of uptake as you transition to that style of technology can be quite difficult. I want to transition a little bit before we talk now about moving into some of the primary handling, secondary handling, and just making sure that our terminology matches as we go through the rest of this. I think that we have all heard or used flexible packaging and terminology, sustainable packaging, rigid. Doesn't always mean the same thing to everybody. So just for the context of what we're going to be talking here today, I'm going to use flexible packaging fairly broadly to encapsulate anything that can be on this list. It could be poly bags, vertical stand-up pouches, trays that are flow wrapped or shrink wrapped, coffee bags. Certainly my young children feast on a lot of the baby or the kid pouches. So anything that can give way or be variable in what's in the bag and how it presents and what its shape is and what its volume is. It can be considered a flexible package. And contrast that with rigid packaging, which can be any range of cartons or small boxes to jars and bottles, pails, buckets, to alcohol bottles, alcohol containers, ketchup, mustard packs, right? Any of these things can be considered rigid, and then they maintain their shape, and they have certainly can vary in dimensions, of course, but they are rigid in their shape and their handling. And before we transition into talking about how to actually pack those things or pack into those things, I want to take a side step to depalletizing. And the reason to talk a little bit about depalletizing here is that depalletizing is something that's certainly not a new technology. There are new elements of technology that are being applied to it, like vision systems or mixed case depalletizing. But especially as we talk about packaging and introducing packaging to your production line or your processing line, it can be a significant differentiator for your costs and your workflows if you introduce a depalletizing step. I think when you talk about something that's rigid, like bottles or jars, fixed depalletizing, which is farthest to the right here on this page, is a very standard, very traditional automation where it can say, okay, I'm going to receive a pallet of bottles and I'm going to depalletize those bottles and I'm going to unscramble them and introduce them one by one to my filling operation. This is equipment that tends to be what I would refer to as fixed automation, and it's high throughput. It's can vary in upfront cost depending on the complexity of what you're looking for, but it can tend to have a very high ROI. It's not going to be particularly flexible for you, so it tends to be a really good fit for operations that, hey, I'm going to be handling jars or bottles or rigid packaging. It will be depalletizing layer by layer, day in, day out in a very consistent manner. Whereas if you are perhaps a co-packer or co-manufacturer that's going to have a very wide range of product mixes, might not be the right fit for you to get a fixed automation depalletizer. It's maybe worth considering to go to a mixed case robotic depalletizing application, or even a fixed case robotic depalletizing application that doesn't rely on vision, or to keep that workflow more manual or semi-automated. You can use worker assist platforms or lifting or delifting platforms to assist with that. And this technology can vary quite widely, but it can potentially be an input to you to differentiate on what you're asking your labor force to do as they introduce product and specifically packaging to your packing line. As we then transition to talking about primary packing, and again, a little bit of terminology here. So primary products can be a wide range of things. Some may use primary to say, well, this is direct food contact, right? It may be touching meat, I'm touching fresh produce, I'm touching baked goods directly. So that is an element of primary, and it can also be encapsulated that primary can be the actual retail item for your customer, right? So if I'm packing a pouch of mixed nuts, the retail item in that case would be the pouch itself and not the individual nut, because that is what's going on the shelf on the display, and that's what the customer is purchasing. And I'm differentiating here as well between, again, flexible packaging and rigid packaging. So this is primary packing of flexible packages. So a lot of the equipment in that tends to be baggers, pouchers. Certainly they're very common pack types today. I think you can walk into a grocery store in the United States of America where you don't immediately see vertical stand-up pouches or poly bags very prevalent. You can have a large variety of bag styles, whether they're gusseted, flat bottom, vertical stand-up. Can be from vertical form, fill, and seal equipment, horizontal form, fill, and seal equipment, or a wide range of bagging activities. And this type of equipment tends to be very critical for the throughput quality and ergonomics for your packing operation. I think it's likely, and certainly in my background, but for many of you here today, I'm sure you have seen products packed entirely by hand, where somebody has a bag on a scale, and they're introducing product into it by hand, and they're weighing or they're counting. And that is a difficult workflow. There's a lot of challenge in the throughput for that. Certainly meeting product weights, whether you're underweight or overweight, both of which are a challenge. Underweight, you can risk a rejection of your product or your load. Overweight, you're giving product away. And of course, the ergonomics of an activity like that and the quality of that type of workflow are quite painful. But going from a purely manual packing operation even to a semi-automated, where you have a semi-auto dynamic scale where someone's still managing that workflow manually, but is an enhancement over a manual workflow. Bagging equipment, though, tends to have fairly moderate upfront costs. There's moderate operational complexity. The intent is for an operator to be able to manage this equipment entirely on their own. It can be challenging to manage product changes and material changes in particular. I don't think that the term sustainable packaging is new to anyone on this call today. Certainly as we continue to learn more about sustainable packaging and transition more to sustainable packaging, whether that's going from polypropylene bags to polyethylene bags, or from plastic packaging in general to potentially more corrugate or paperboard-based packaging, your equipment may need to change over into, hey, it was really good for a polypropylene vertical stand-up pouch, but it's not handling the polyethylene-based pouch quite as well. Those are changes that you have to be able to manage, and they can be complex and costly because your equipment may not be outfitted to handle that packaging style. And while these are very robust and reliable pieces of equipment, they tend to have moderate to high service complexity. Things rarely go wrong on a vertical stand-up bagger generally, but when they go wrong, they can be quite complex to resolve. So these are high ROI pieces of equipment, but the total cost of ownership or the total complexity of owning and maintaining this piece of equipment can be complex and can be fairly high. Off to the side, I'll mention just flow wrappers and tray packers. Again, various materials, and those tend to have much more high upfront cost than a bagger, for example. Moderate operational complexity, but they can be moderate to very high ROI depending on your product mix and the volumes that you're operating in. I'll touch briefly here as well on the primary packing of rigid packaging. These tend to be a little bit more straightforward than your flexible packaging because the container is rigid. The dispensing is either volume based or weight based generally. Fairly straightforward to operate and to maintain, and they tend to be quite high ROI investments. Again, I don't want to delve too deep into the primary packing stuff. I think everyone here, if they are a processing or packing operation and they're accustomed to dealing with these products, tends to be more familiar with this equipment today. I will briefly touch on quality inspection. I think certainly at the start of my career in fresh produce, quality inspection was a much more critical workflow, but a much more manual workflow. I think today it's hard to walk into a food handling facility that doesn't have some combination of check weighing, metal detection or x-rays, and even vision-based inspection equipment. The challenge with some of this type of equipment is it can be somewhat essential, potentially not necessarily value added, right? If you are having challenges with your quality, there is a great ROI to be achieved on your quality inspection. But this equipment tends to be fairly essential to anyone supplying food to consumers in the United States of America today. It's difficult to necessarily ascribe a very basic ROI calculation to this. I think it can be quite variable, but this equipment tends to be pretty essential, and I think many of you have and are accustomed to dealing with it. What I'll transition to now is talking about more of the end of line, which I think will be more relevant for everybody here today, and not whereas thus far we've covered front of line, which tends to be more relevant to larger scale processing production operations. And when I say end of line, it can be fairly broad and encapsulating here, from case erecting and tray forming to master case packing to case sealing and labeling, palletizing and pallet securement. I will also add a couple things that aren't here on this production flow diagram, but are relevant. Certainly conveyance and material handling in general is all underlying all of this end of line case pack or end of line automation. So for product and packaging to flow from station to station or throughout your production line, conveyance and material handling is very important, very critical. And that's part of the broader automation roadmap. And then labeling, I put a little disclaimer there. I'm sure many of you have a labeling application or label application at multiple stages of your process. Certainly your primary packing or your retail level item to your master case or shipper, and down to your pallet handling and pallet labeling. I included it on the case sealing because that tends to be where many place case label applicators or inkjet printers to apply a master label to the master case, but it's certainly labeling is prevalent throughout the production flow. Again, like in item level or primary level packaging, we'll talk a little bit about terminology here just to make sure that we're referring to the same things, at least in the context of this presentation. There are many different case types across many materials and configurations. Some of the more common ones are listed here. Between RSCs are the most common case types, the regular slotted container. Half slotteds are very frequent. Telescoping half-solid containers, and of course, display readies are very common in grocery stores and in food handling in particular. Reusable plastic containers continue to grow at a faster and faster rate. And then wraparound cases, trays. And I want to distinguish between case erecting, which is you have a pre-made blank of a box and you use an erector to erect that box, versus box and tray forming, which is you have just a flat piece of corrugated board and you actually form the box with a piece of equipment on your floor. And an example of a bliss or a three-piece box is here in the bottom right. Show my cursor. So this is actually a box formed out of 3 distinct pieces of cardboard, or of corrugate rather specifically. And those boxes have different profiles, different applications than your basic RSCs. And as I mentioned, there's a difference certainly between case erecting and box and tray forming. And you can see the GIFs here of a fairly standard case erector of RSC boxes up in the top left versus a tray former. And again, this is a Bliss 3-piece tray former. You have the side panels coming from each of the 2 sides, and what's called the body or the wraparound panel here down through the middle. And the piece that's punching through is called a mandrel. And there's a difference in why these boxes are used and when they're used. And certainly case erecting is a low upfront cost, low operational complexity, and very high ROI. Box and tray forming tends to be certainly more higher upfront costs and much higher complexity in operating and servicing it, but very high ROI in that it yields much higher throughput, certainly a reduction in repetitive motions and injuries, and can also reduce your material cost substantially. There's much less corrugate board in that 3-piece box than there is in a standard RSC on a like-for-like volume. I'll transition now to, I think, where we want to start really hammering down into the automation components, which are the secondary master case packing. So this, again, is for flexible packaging. It differs, of course, from rigid. Flexible packaging or case packing of flexible packages can vary widely, from very low speed to very high speed to various types of robotic systems or non-robotic systems. There's many available configurations. Some of the most prevalent common ones are listed on the right there in top load or horizontal, bottom load, wraparound, etc. Case packing is where in your operations, the vast majority of labor is wrapped up. Certainly more people are involved in putting the master or the primary package into the box than likely anywhere else in your operation. I know obviously I'm painting with a broad brush there, but that tends to be the case. Certainly was in my previous world. It is very, very much the case across the wide subset of former customers today, that the labor and workflows tend to be more wrapped up in the case packing than anywhere else. So automating that obviously holds a lot of appeal, but automating case packing has very high upfront costs. There's high operational complexity. There's high service complexity. It's a high total cost of ownership. And so there is a high long-term ROI because you are certainly increasing throughput and quality and reducing your requirement on labor for that workflow. But it is a difficult thing to adapt. And nonetheless, it remains a holy grail for a lot of food handling operations in the US. Everything I just said about flexible packaging is equally true about rigid packaging, but the cost for absorbing, is equally true for case packing of rigid packs. But the adoption cost of the initial investment tends to be a little bit more moderate, a little bit lower than it is relative to flexible case packers. Again, like on flexible case packers, you can go from very low to very high speed, again, depending on your production needs and your operation. And like on case packing of flexible packs, there's a very high long-term ROI, but also a high total cost of ownership. I'll transition now to, okay, we've packed our stuff, right? Whether it's rigid or flexible, it ends up in some type of container, and that tends to be a corrugate box for many of you, but certainly can be plastic, it can be an open top tray, it can be a wide range of things. Case sealing is very common to many of you. For those of you who are dealing with open top trays or open top cases, ignore me for a hot minute, but case sealing for many of you is relevant on RSCs and HSCs in particular. And there's a wide range of solutions available, from very, very basic and semi-automated through fully randomized, fully automated systems that are servo-driven. You can spend a little, you can spend a lot. But there's generally a lot of workflow value available in automating, even at low cost investments on the case sealing side and the labeling side as well. These types of equipment tend to be fairly low operational complexity, fairly low service complexity, but high ROI. And I'll use an example here, particularly on the case sealing. I think it's a great place to show it. If you look at the middle GIF there, which is where the packer is actually folding those flaps in and pushing into the case sealer, certainly you can invest in that piece of equipment, or you can do it manually. And for many of us, you might say, well, I still have a fully burdened employee involved in the activity of sealing boxes, right? On the one hand, you could be using a tape gun by hand and dragging that across and folding those flaps and closing that box. On the other hand, you could just be folding the flaps and pushing it through and letting the taper tape it. And the second GIF to the right there, this is a slightly more complex piece of equipment. Still a very, very low cost piece of equipment, but it has what's called a plow on it, or a fold flapping mechanism. In this case, you no longer have the operator involved or the packer involved in folding the flaps. The packer has been moved to a much higher value, a much higher potential value workflow activity. And that has immediate workflow benefit for your operations, right? And I use that as a very basic example because I think a lot of us like to think of automation as very advanced, very complex, and it certainly can be. But you can achieve a lot of value in your operation by simply taking out some of the painful manual workflows. I use the word painful in particular here because not only are you certainly allocating cost to folding flaps by hand if you're doing so today, but that is a very repetitive motion injury kind of stimulating activity, right? And it is not a workflow that yields a lot of worker satisfaction in my experience, is to fold flaps all day. So with just even a low level cost investment in case sealing, you can yield a lot of workflow value and take your labor force and move them to better jobs. So these tend to be very high ROI investments. They increase your throughput, they increase your quality, they reduce your reportable incidents, your workers' comp claims, and they certainly reduce repetitive motion injuries. I'll move to palletizing next. Stacking boxes is a very common workflow for a lot of operations in the US, whether you're in food or not. There are many different types of palletizers with many available configurations, including whether you're centralized or decentralized, collaborative or industrial, conventional or robotic in general. What's wonderful about palletizing is, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to use this terminology. I'm not sure if I'm allowed to use this terminology in the webinar, but I will anyway. I treat palletizing as the gateway drug to automation. It's very easy to envision how a human being lifting a box and putting on a pallet can be replaced by an automation system, right? And when I say replaced, the workflow can be replaced. It is a difficult job to stack 30, 40, 50-pound boxes on a pallet all day. It yields a lot of repetitive motion injuries. Building those stacks can be difficult, especially as you get higher and higher. And that individual is almost certainly likely to yield more value for you in a different role in your work, in your operation, than stacking boxes all day. So this is what a lot of packing operations, whether they're in food or not food in the US, start with is, hey, I have case sealers, I have case directors potentially. What's next for me? Palletizing is next for you, if you haven't already pursued that. And so the benefit of this is low operational complexity, moderate service complexity. If something goes wrong, service complexity can be moderate. There's a moderate long-term ROI, depending, of course, on how you look at it. And there can be a moderate total cost of ownership over the life of the system. But the value to your operation of reducing the injuries, reducing the exposure to that operator for repetitive motion injuries, and to increasing your throughput and the quality of your stacks. And to a lot of our customers, certainly this is my experience when I automated palletizing in my previous career, but also a lot of customers for Formic used automated palletizing to raise the number of layers in their pallets, right? Hey, my operator could only reach 72 inches before. I can now build pallets upwards of 90 inches and reduce my unit cost of production, reduce certainly the number of cycles for my forklift operators and moving those pallets in or out, and reduce the storage bays that I need in my storage operation because I have a higher density per pallet. And one other thing I'll add, which isn't on the slide, but just to be aware of, is 11% of forklifts in the United States of America are involved in an incident or in an accident with an employee on an annual basis. So if you have 9 or 10 forklifts, it's almost certain that they will be involved, unfortunately, in an incident with an employee on your production floor at some point this year. The reason that statistics is important is that you have to think about where the highest likelihood of exposure for your employees is to a forklift. And invariably, it's in the stacking area. It's in the palletizing area where forklifts are zooming in and out, retrieving stacked product, getting it out of there, bringing empty pallets in. Automating palletizing, even if it's a fairly basic palletizing application without pallet conveyance or without high level of integration, automation integration, can yield a lot of benefit for your operation, both from a cost management, kind of production throughput and quality increases, but to reducing your repetitive motion injuries and just your potential exposure for your worker incidents with forklifts, or I should say powered industrial trucks in general. Pallet securement comes downstream of building a pallet. I'm going to spend very little time on this, but like with case sealing, a lot of us today in our production operations could still be strapping or strap trapping by hand. It's very low cost investment generally, and very high kind of benefit to a lot of operations to invest in pallet securement. It doesn't have to be a fully automated system by any means, but there's quite a bit of workflow value to be achieved with a little bit of investment in pallet securement. And finally, I'll jump to the production flow, kind of what we'll refer to as other, not front of line necessarily, not end of line, but somewhere nebulous around the front or the back, upstream or downstream of there, including receiving operations, pallet transport, and material handling more broadly, and storage and retrieval. There's a very wide range of automation available. I think everyone today, if they have a shipping dock, has a lot of forklift activity or a lot of pallet jack activity around their docks, and streamlining that operation or achieving even just 3% increase in efficiency in dock operations is always very valuable. So there is a wide range of automation available to solve those problems. I'm not going to delve too deep on them here because I don't know that they're necessarily relevant to everyone here today, but these are things that are important to consider as part of your broader automation roadmap. So I'll now transition, having kind of covered some of the content, I'll transition on, so why is this relevant to you? Where do you start? I know that you might be thinking, well, I already have this piece, or I already have that piece, or that's not the place to start for me. And you're absolutely right. So on where to start, I'm going to go back a second and reflect on what are the goals, right? What problem are you trying to solve in your operation? Certainly, as we look back at survey data that we have showing us what the top goals and challenges are for a lot of production operations in the US today. I'm not going to reread them, but they're here for you. I think many of you are trying to solve some similar problems. So as you consider where to pursue kind of in your automation roadmap, we put together a summary chart here. And I think for me, it's important to just think about not just the initial upfront investment in the equipment, and not on having or owning the equipment, but in what you're going to do with it and how you're going to use it and how your operation is going to benefit from it. And how it's going to affect your workflows and your operation over a period of time, right? So certainly upfront cost is important, being aware of operational complexity and service complexity is important, and the ROI is important. But the total cost of ownership is very important as well. And total cost of ownership for me includes not just how much will it cost for you to replace parts on this piece of equipment or to PM it, but what's your worker turnover? What is the retraining time? How long will it take to readapt and bring your production levels back up to where they were with a skilled operator? And all of those things are important contributions to total cost and complexity of ownership. So our broader recommendation here is focus on high ROI and low TCO activities. If you can find that perfect mix, that's a great place to start. So just looking at that here, case erecting is a great place to start. Case sealing and labeling is a great place to start. And pallet securement is a great place to start. My hunch here is that many of you have already done those activities. Many of you have case sealers, many of you have case erectors, many of you have pallet securement in some way, shape, or form, because those tend to be pretty essential to your operations. So as we move on from high ROI, low TCO, the high ROI and moderate TCO is the next frontier. And for many operations in the United States of America, especially as you focus on change management and adoption of new technology and automation, our recommendation is to start with palletizing on that front. And let me take a little bit of a back step and kind of talk about context here shortly, right? So case sealers and case erectors and even some of those large layer D palletizers of bottles, these tend to be what we refer to as fixed equipment or fixed automation. They serve a great purpose, but they are fixed in what they're able to do for you and how they do it. There is a learning curve, a different learning curve for modular automation or flexible and robotic automation relative to fixed automation. So it's important to be aware that there's a different change management component to that. ROI calculations, as I mentioned just on the previous couple slides, if you're assessing your investments purely off of ROI, I think, certainly I can't speak for your business. In my previous role running the operation, ROI alone was not enough. I was often solving for a wider range of problems than just my ROI. And ROI was a little bit too limited in scope of what it could tell me. Certainly total cost of ownership is an important component as you consider your investments. But as you consider throughput, reliability, safety, worker turnover, worker availability, those are all important components of your assessment. And again, that's why, going back to some of the previous slide, that's why some of these activities where they're fairly high ROI and low to moderate activities on the TCO are important, because they tend to kind of encapsulate and capture some of these components as well. Ongoing service is often overlooked. Again, that's total cost of ownership, but it's also not just about the cost, but the complexity, right? I was very fortunate in my previous role. I had a full team of very skilled robotic and electromechanical technicians and automation specialists. Not everyone is so fortunate, right? We have a wide range of customers and a wide range of geographies. And for some, you may have someone who's very strong mechanically, but perhaps not as strong electrically or electronically. Onboarding automation that is very, very advanced and vision systems and servos that you're not equipped to service or maintain may not be the right play for you today. It may be in the future, right? Or you can reach out for resources that can help you with that, right? And finally, I think for a lot of our operations, we span the range broadly of very large corporate customers to small operations, and their decision-making processes tend to be different, and their experiences tend to be different. And certainly, I come from a family-owned business background. In my previous role, the decision-making process is different in a family-owned business than it is in a different type of business. And what I found to be true, whether you're a family-owned business or not, is that many operations have tried to go down this path and say, hey, well, I invested in a piece of equipment or an automation, and it turned into a $300,000 paperweight or a $3 million paperweight, and I'm never going to do that again. And I have that paperweight sitting in the corner or in a warehouse somewhere that is a trophy and a monument to my failure. Certainly, I had a warehouse in my previous role that has like 52 pieces of equipment that I failed to get right. But sometimes it's you that gets it wrong. Sometimes it's your automation partner that gets it wrong. And sometimes the world changes, right? I think probably there's a number of people on this call who would say that they bought mesh baggers at some point because mesh was the new frontier. And there's a number of mesh baggers listed on eBay today that I think many of us wish we could sell. So sometimes the product mix changes and you can get stuck. And one failure can leave a bad taste for a long time. So as I kind of take those lessons learned and take what we talked about so far and apply it to how to build a successful roadmap given what you know from that. I think for many of us here today, I've already mentioned end-of-line automation is a very broadly applicable area of focus for all of us. I think it's important to consider your entire workflow benefits. The case sealing example is a really, really good one for me. It doesn't take much to upgrade to the next tier of automation capability and get the benefit, even if it's might be called semi-automatic, even if it's not as attractive as potentially having a really nice large-scale automation system in your operation. But consider the workflow benefits, consider the total cost of ownership, consider your context for your operation, your labor force, your management team's bandwidth. Plan for more than capital costs. Certainly consider total cost of ownership. Consider that I think a lot of us, when doing ROI calculations, we may even account for service on an annual basis, or the overhead that I have on my service team, or the parts that I replace. And I rarely account for, I might have a catastrophic failure of my automation system 4 years from now, and that might cost me $40,000. It might cost me $400,000, depending on what it is. It's hard to account for. It's a discrete variable. We hope we don't get it wrong, but it is important to be aware that it can happen to you. Certainly, it's happened to me. And then focus on, there's no one size that fits all, but there are workflows you can improve and automation you can onboard today, especially as you consider change management. Introducing automation to your operation is a challenging thing. getting your operations team, your production team, your management team on board, acclimating your operators, training them, preparing them, equipping your service team or your automation partner to service the equipment and to be responsive to your needs. All of that is change management. And an ROI calculation alone, or just thinking, hey, this is a really cool piece of equipment alone, isn't going to answer that question for you. You have to work with your automation partner or work internally to build that context for yourself. So as a very basic kind of roadmap here, we try to frame in crawl, walk, run, sprint. Going back to what we talked about so far, if you focus on casing and labeling, case erecting, primary packing, you will have activities you can onboard fairly readily. The change management required in onboarding that type of equipment, that type of technology is fairly readily manageable. Certainly the upfront investment costs and the total cost of ownership are very manageable. Many of you probably already have that. So transitioning next to palletizing and again, a wide range of palletizing and pallet securements is a great place to reduce your labor requirements, reduce some of the worker kind of highest exposure for injuries, repetitive motion injuries, exposure to forklifts and powered industrial trucks, and just things fall, right? You're building a stack. It's an unstable pallet. My 5'4" stacker can't reach the 8-foot tall pallet. Things go awry in those situations. Let automation do those jobs for you. Finally, as you transition more to running, we start talking about tray forming, not case erecting, but literally forming the box there with a piece of equipment, and then ultimately case packing, both with flexible and rigid packs. To finally sprinting, I think some of you are likely very large scale operations have likely done a lot of these activities already, and now you're thinking about autonomous mobile robots, AGVs, mixed case depalletizing vision systems, and even potentially ASRS or automated storage and retrieval. I think for many of us, we'll be living in the crawl, walk, run world for a while yet. But for those of you who are looking for that differentiation on the logistics in particular and on the advanced automation, that sprint category is most relevant to you. There are, of course, a range of ways in which you can manage these different automation pursuits. I think a lot of us are accustomed to buying equipment. Certainly that's what I did in my previous career. Was I bought a lot of equipment. I got some of it wrong. What I found at times was, particularly on something that is new to me, whether that was robotic palletizing or hey, I have hyperspectral imaging, vision sorting technology that I know very little about. My team knows very little about, particularly as we were in rural Pennsylvania. We needed a strong partner to partner with for service and support and even software upgrades and feature upgrading capabilities. Formic is able to offer that to you through our robotics as a service model today. Certainly, there are strong automation partners that you can collaborate with across the board. But what we have found to be true is you don't have to manage the risk on your own. You don't have to onboard this and figure out, hey, where am I going to find an automation engineer to manage my automation investments today? You can use your resources that are available to you to help with that today. Which brings us finally to the resources that are available to you. I think certainly we mentioned the 2024 U.S. manufacturing report. Thank you, Alex, our host today, for putting that together, and to everyone who participated. Currently, Formic is running a trial program. We're on a 3-month collaborative palletizers that we can extend to you, and you want to get something with no obligation for 3 months on your floor and see if robotic collaborative palletizing is for you. We have a program available to you today. I can help you get started with palletizing or anything for that matter that's on this list. Certainly feel free to email me or reach out to me subsequent to this webinar. And then we have technology tools we can use today, like our augmented reality app. We can actually see, and this is a real video capture of one of our customer sites where we use augmented reality to show them what one of our solutions would look like on their floor today. And I will turn it back over to Alex. I know I'm a little over time. I apologize for that. It was more content than I anticipated. Sorry, Alex.
No problem. Yeah, thanks, Daniel. Like I said at the beginning, it's a lot to boil the roadmap in 30 minutes. Obviously, we went over that, but it looks like everyone had a great time because there are some questions that came through, and we'll just spend a couple minutes and let you guys go, get back to your day. But we'll take a couple minutes here to answer these, and if you have any more, drop them in now. Some of these are pretty easy, or no, rapid fire, so I'll just fire them your way. Daniel,
Sure.
what speeds can automated case packers achieve?
Yeah, it's a great question. One of the things that's beneficial with robotic case packers in particular tends to be that they tend to be pretty modular, right? We have some customers who are packed at 350 units per minute. We have others who are packing at, hey, I have 6 pouches going in a box a minute. tends to be fairly modular, right? Certainly it extends the length of your machine, but hey, tack another robot, tack another robot, tack another robot. So there's a very wide range. It is very unlikely that someone has an application where automation cannot be extended to meet that need.
Gotcha. And upstream of that, we just got a question from Braden. What's Formic's involvement with primary packaging projects?
Yeah, absolutely. We have done them. We do them regularly. I think as we get into primary, I think my guess is based off that question, they're probably talking about direct food contact handling. Certainly, I have direct experience with that myself, and our team does as well. And we're doing actively developing multiple primary handling opportunities today, including meat handling, frozen foods, and also, if it's talking about in a tray or in a flow wrap, we're doing that a couple of those projects today as well. But we are very comfortable with primary handling.
Thanks. Palletizing. For collaborative palletizing, what safety features are required to allow for the robot to operate that way without fencing?
Yeah, that's a great question. So all of our collaborative palletizing solutions involve both. So first of all, everything we do has a fully managed third-party risk assessment. But in particular in the collaboratives, and we share that risk assessment with our customers, but particularly in collaboratives, every one of our collaborative solutions utilizes area scanners. So there's multiple area scanners per system, and that those area scanners are aware of what's in the zone and where they are. So there's speeds that are permitted to run collaborative robots in. So this is my normal speed mode, and I'm running at X 100 millimeters per second, whatever it may be. And subsequent to that, we say, okay, now an area scanner is detecting the presence of a box or a person or a forklift or a pallet jack. We slow it down to a very safe speed, which is, again, based on your third-party risk assessment and on federal safety regulations. And ultimately, if something were to touch you or you were going to contact, collaborative robots are also known as force-limited robots. If you touch it, it will stop. And if it touches you, it will stop. But what we tend to do is, of course, as I mentioned, every one of them has a set or a fleet of area scanners on it. We can also utilize other technologies depending on kind of what your specific safety needs are for your application. But as we start to crest shoulder height and approach kind of the 60-inch mark, at that point, we utilize hard guarding above 60 inches, whether it's a collaborative or a compact industrial or a large industrial application, to minimize the potential for head impact, whether that's from the robot moving a box or the robot itself, or, hey, I've built a tall stack. I don't want a box to fall off the tall stack and hit me in the head. So it's really a mix of technologies depending on what we need, but every single one of them starts with area scanners and a third-party risk assessment.
Got it. Thanks, Daniel. And yeah, I know in your past you've a lot of experience with palletizing and that end-of-line stuff, and we're showing the picture here because obviously that's one of our bread and butter. We've done a lot, both collaborative and industrial, so we've seen a lot of different use cases that the audience is probably asking about here. But
yeah, absolutely.
A couple more questions, just two left, and then we'll wrap it up. They're kind of two people asked similar question about like maintenance and failure mode. So one was asking, is there a common failure mode you see with the end-of-line automation? And someone else was curious, hey, I've seen robot OEMs advertise very high mean time between failures, like 10,000 hours between failures. So what is causing these automation systems to fail? Is there a common thread there, I guess?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'm going to answer them slightly differently, right? I think they're, to me, somewhat slightly different questions. On the first question, where do we fail most often? And I'll kind of apply that to myself, both in my previous career and today with Formic. We don't generally fail in the automation system itself. We fail in the inputs, right? And one of the things I should have mentioned earlier in this webinar is everything you see here in your production line is interrelated, right? There's interdependencies. And what we tend to find is, let me pick on palletizing for a second because there's just so much activity in the palletizing space. When something goes wrong in a palletizing application, it tends to be that it's poor packaging, or, hey, I'm lifting something with a vacuum from the top. The case is heavy. I have a 30-year-old case sealer with bad tape. And guess what? The box fails and the tape falls out and all the stuff comes out the bottom, right? When we're designing for solutions or kind of applying what are standard portfolio of solutions, we assess the quality of your packaging, your upstream and downstream processes. But I would say that it is absolutely true that there are hardware and software failures at times in automation. They tend to be far less frequent than the actual inputs to the palletizing operation. When something does go wrong, what tends to be actually is the conveyor, right? Hey, I have an Infeed conveyor. It's handling thousands and thousands of boxes a day. The robot has no issue with it, but my band on my conveyor popped off or ripped, or my motor burned out and I need to swap a motor. So very common things. Bearings, certainly very common things. End of arm tooling, if you have suction cups or vacuum pads, those are wear items. Those get replaced regularly. So those are things that tend to go wrong in there. And then to your second question, Alex, on the mean time to failure, can you ask that question again?
Yeah, I guess some robot OEMs advertise very high mean MTBF, 10,000 hours,
Yep.
12,000 hours, whatever. What typically
Yep.
causes the automation systems to fail and need maintenance then?
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. What tends to cause automation systems to fail prematurely, let's say, hey, I'm not anywhere close to my 10,000. What happened? Why did my robot fail at 4,000 or 5,000? It tends to be that the robot is the wrong fit for the application, right? And an example I'll use is you may have a collaborative robot that is rated for, let's say, 20 kilograms. And if you are handling a payload that is consistently at 20 or maybe 21, say, well, I'm close enough and I have a little bit of overage, you're going to have premature joint failure on that robot, because you're going to be putting a lot of torque, a lot of load on a joint on the robot, day in, day out, time and again, right? And so if your steady state that you run your production operation at is well within the bounds of technology that you're applying, you will see the benefit of the mean time to failure. If you are applying a load on a system that is beyond what its steady state kind of design is, you will see premature failure. On a robot in particular, it tends to be joint failures. The most common one are end of arm tooling, because a lot of wear items. But beyond that, it tends to be joint failures but they tend to be from, hey, I spec'd the wrong robot for the application. I'm going to put in a shameless plug for Formic here, because we are technology agnostic. So we're not pushing this robot. It's what we're incentivized to align with your production outcomes. So, hey, if you're looking to achieve a throughput of 40 cases a minute across these case types and these weights and these ranges, we're going to find the right fit for you, because our commitment to you is a performance and service level guarantee, and not that, hey, it's this robot here. The equipment is secondary. The performance is primary.
Got it. Great information. Last one, and then we're at the end of the hour. Got to wrap up here. But it says, our products change often. How is there a way to automate if we might be packing or handling something completely different in a year from now?
Yeah, that's a stab to my heart, Alex. That's what happened to me, certainly with the mesh bagger example before. But this is true for a lot of us, right? I think shopper trends are changing, or they keep evolving. I think and I think there's certainly events that happen to change more dramatically than others. But I think today in grocery stores, we see a lot of pre-packs, right? What might have been loose packs of produce, for example, before, are now pre-packed products, right? You say, well, I have a lot of automation technology that I can use for this product type, and now a year later, it's totally different. I'm stuck with these paperweights, right? The short form answer to that is invest in automation that is flexible. But hey, I can retool this thing. I could do this before, but now I need to do this, and you can retool it. That's a lot easier said than done. You need a good partner on that. Another way is, and this is kind of what I started doing in my previous career, is if I knew that my business had a lot of potential to change, I couldn't invest in something that was going to have a 5, 6, 7-year ROI. I needed something that was flexible and modular enough that I'm going to use it and get the benefit of it today. I'm going to swap it out when I need something different, and I will not have lost money on it. That's a very difficult set of constraints that I've applied. Again, another shameless plug. This is why I joined Formic, is to solve that specific problem, because ultimately, because we're not married to the piece of equipment, your business changes, we'll take that system back. Here's one that fits your need, right? Or we'll retool it for you to make sure that fits your need. But it has no simple answer from a technology perspective. I think a lot of us have been burned on investments we've made and kind of, what I said, trophies to my failure that sit in a warehouse somewhere, because life changes, the business changes, the workflows change, and that piece of equipment is not necessarily what I can use today. That is, however, one of the benefits of flexible and modular automation. Certainly one of the benefits of robotics relative to fixed automation. If I have a piece of fixed automation, I might not be able to retool it. If I have a robot, there is some cost involved, but I can almost certainly retool it to serve a different purpose.
Awesome. Well, that was an awesome webinar. This is going to be on our website for people to go back and watch. Please share it with your colleagues. Thank you to Daniel for presenting all of that. Yeah, we're available. Daniel is dlolic@formwork.co. I'm alex@formwork.co. Reach out to us, connect on LinkedIn. If you want to get in touch with our team and kind of have a visit and show you the augmented reality app and get started, we'd love to have that opportunity as well. So that's it. Thanks again, Daniel.
Yeah.
And
thank you, Alex. Thank you, everyone, and appreciate the questions. They were good.
Awesome. Until next time, we'll see you guys next month. All right.
Thanks,
bye-bye.
all. Bye.